Saltwater History, episode 130, back on Wednesday night. Richard, how was your fourth?
Okay, I'm just in the midst of this great celebration of the month in which the church dedicates devotion and attention to the most precious blood, the most precious redemptive blood of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
Did you do anything for the fourth, though?
Nothing.
That's kind of nice.
I mean, to the point where it was a putty-esque, if you're a Seinfeld fan, a putty-esque 4th of July. I just stood at the wall or stared at the wall.
We talked about this a little last week. Is it even the 4th of July anymore? Or is it just July 4th?
What? I mean, come on. It's all ridiculous. I don't.
It feels like the Super Bowl,
Mm,
but just during the summertime in a way.
I mean, just scripted.
Just an excuse for.
Oh yeah, it's just an excuse to explode things or blow your fingers off and go to the emergency room. I don't get the whole. I mean, I used to have fun with it when I was a kid because fireworks are cool, and that's fine. I did when I was younger have, I suspect, what was a healthy sense of patriotism and expression, exercise of the virtue of patriotism. But as much as I again retain the residue of that in I love the good aspects and people of the country, there's very little left in rah rah, sis boom bah type of patriotism.
Yeah. I actually had a good time, though. I was surrounded by Patriots, and it was
Oh, that's good.
nice to have the day off.
Were you up in Wisconsin with Sean Hannity or partying with the Fox and Friends crew?
I didn't know, is that a thing? Is that Hannity's spot?
It's Hannity's spot when he on his radio program, he used to play that Martina McBride song that started "Let Freedom Ring." It was every day. It wasn't just, and it was called Independence Day. Of course, her song has nothing to do with the 4th of July. It was just about her escaping an abusive husband. So, but in many ways, just analogous, the American people, at least the people of goodwill that still remain within the country, we're trying to escape an abusive relationship, and our abusive domestic violence peddler is and violator is the government. And not just in Washington, but just down the street from you, in your state capital, it's all around us. It's like the air we breathe. Toxic, putrid air we breathe.
Toxic.
Mm-hmm.
We got some good stories today. Do you want to lead us with the first one?
Sure. Well, 4th of July brings with it, on the same date, in fact, the official excommunication, latae sententiae, which means that by the very act of it's, in other words, not by a trial or through a official conclusion by a trial of excommunication, but latae sententiae, Archbishop Vigano, the former papal nuncio of the United States, was excommunicated by the Vatican, by Pope Francis and his minions.
We get into excommunication before we speak more on this?
Sure, and maybe we should speak more broadly about who Archbishop Vigano is.
Sure.
Carlo Maria Vigano, as I had mentioned, was a highly respected theologian, official, bishop within the church. He was elevated to an extremely important role under the Benedict pontificate, and that was being the papal nuncio, or the Pope's primary representative in the United States in 2011. And that was a role in which he served to 2018, from my recollection. He became famous because he was a whistleblower. Yes, the church needs whistleblowers just as much as we need whistleblowers in corporate America, in aviation, and companies like Boeing. Although, unlike those within Boeing and other companies, when they bring up how lethal their DEI programs actually are, how destructive they are, Vigano has not been offed yet. He was a whistleblower in the church because he exposed the McCarrick scandal and all of the abuse that had gone on while Theodore McCarrick was the really front man, both during the John Paul II pontificate and then for a time into the Benedict pontificate and era of the papacy, wherein he was really the go-to guy in the United States. Vigano blew the lid on the idea on the rumors that had already always swirled around McCarrick that he was a serial homosexual abuser of seminarians. And this is he was a serial abuser before that, even when he was a priest, and he had damaged by this point scores of young men's lives, to the point where he was being called Uncle Teddy. In fact, he insisted that those who he abused would call him Uncle Teddy. So this is an ephebophiliac and someone who is a serial homosexual abuser. Then Francis, despite Benedict having essentially ostracized and secluded, ordered the seclusion of McCarrick and others, he Francis, because, and this is per Archbishop Vigano, just was more concerned about whether McCarrick was aligned with him in terms of his theology, in terms of his moral and futuristic vision for the church. Was he a progressive? Was he politically aligned? And once Francis was able to determine that McCarrick was aligned with him and the St. Gallen group, well, then he was rehabilitated and became once again out in the open, serving as a former archbishop and still a cardinal within the church. And once Vigano blew the lid on this, of course, eventually McCarrick was the Vatican distanced itself from McCarrick, and because the scandal was just too great and too damaging, or was thought to be too damaging, and no one ever called Vigano out for this, that he had said something false about the unholy nexus and alliance that had been formed here. And eventually, when it was determined by, I think rightly so, Archbishop Vigano, that he was persona non grata within the hierarchy, particularly in Rome, that he went into semi-seclusion or hiding for his own protection. He founded his own sort of fraternal and priestly organization. He began, and he has ordained a number of bishops in this organization. And I believe it's called Ex Urge Domine. And he became much more of a traditionalist, whereas he had celebrated the Novus Ordo before. He started openly complain about and point out the holes and theological, liturgical, philosophical misgivings, foibles, mistakes of the Second Vatican Council. Not just the spirit of Vatican II, but that the council, it is right to question its validity beyond it being a pastoral council. So some of these things might be lost on the non-Catholics in the audience or those who are just somewhat engaged. So a major point of contention among those who are more traditional Catholics and traditionalist Catholics, or even restorationist Catholics, is whether the Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council, called by John the 23rd and then presided over after John the 23rd's death by Paul VI, because its identity was as a pastoral council rather than as a council like in the old ecumenical councils, let's say of the 4th and 5th or 6th or 7th centuries, which were to define doctrine. They were doctrinal councils. This is a pastoral council about how to most appropriately deliver, communicate, evangelize the faith. So any major liturgical, theological, even what we might call ecclesiological changes in church teaching, it wouldn't be even called changes or developments. So let's call them developments, would not be had at a pastoral council, or that would not be seen as so much as authoritative or binding to the faithful as dogmatic. as much as was a dogmatic constitution or a series of them within the Second Vatican Council. So to summarize, Vigano became more and more resolute in his attack. What I would consider, of course, and always did consider very valid attacks on Francis as someone who was covering up and has covered up for homosexualist and children, pedophiliac abusers, covered up for a variety of different crimes, financial, uh, moral. Francis has no qualm or hesitation in supporting people who are openly heretical and schismatic, literally schismatic from the church, because they have so departed from the tradition and teaching and the church's understanding and exegesis of Holy Scripture and writ. And therefore, it became more and more clear that what both in his rhetoric and in his actions, Vigano was doing was invalidating or attempting to argue that Pope Francis is an antipope, that he's a pretender to the papal throne. And we don't want to get into the technical of all these contentions that what Pope Benedict did when he was resigned was not resign the munus or the and all these technical terms about the roles and authorities of the papacy. But so what we can just state to summarize is that Vigano just said that this is an ape church that Pope Francis is running. It's an alternative. It's a unholy and very invalid and inadequate replica of the church. And so he took what's called a sede vacantis in large part position. Sede vacantis meaning the seat is vacant. The see of Peter is vacant. And that in point of fact, and this is where I think I would depart from Vigano just in my own study. Not that I have any authority to do so. It's just my perception, right? And we have to keep that clear. Is that Pope Francis was probably, from my vantage point, a validly elected pope, because it was clear that at least Benedict didn't voice, nor was he adamant about the invalidity of his successor's election. So he had, to my mind, formally, that means intentionally renounced the papacy. It doesn't matter in what aspect. These are all technicalities. He stepped down as pope, although he retained the title as Pope Emeritus, which was weird and novel. But so I would contend that he was elected validly, but once he became, or maybe he always was, but once he acted on heretical and schismatic teaching, once he embraces the Pachamama and allows for the worship of a false idol within St. Peter's, within the Vatican, in Rome itself, and then of course espouses and then perpetuates and encourages open schism, whether it be in Germany, and of course all the ecclesial division that he's wrought. He brings chaos as someone who's an emissary of Satan as opposed to the Good Shepherd would. So therefore, as a result, once he became a heretic and started to attempt to even nudge the church in heretical direction. I mean, we have to remember, this is a man who has a statue erected for Martin Luther. He has a heresiarch in the Vatican. I mean, this is obscene. And we could list 1,000 different other things that invalidate Pope Francis or Bergoglio as a valid pope, and that's why I would call him an anti-pope. So yes, I do believe, in point of fact, it was after his election that he vacated the seat or the see of Peter. So, long story short, then, to summarize, on July 4th, actually just before that, the Vatican, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, it was formerly the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the congregation within the Vatican of bishops and other theologians, priests, clergy members, prelates, who really correct theological error, attempt to, or under Francis' pontificate, advance theological error and heresy. They declared that he should show up for a trial. At first, it was thought that he would show up and he would defend himself, which I wish he did, because then the spectacle would be, and I wish he would have insisted that it would be aired live so that all of these grievances could be heard, and then that Vigano's contentions could be either affirmed, denied, or responded to with no comment, evaded by the hierarchy. So he refused to go because he, in his own words, said that I don't recognize the authority of this ape church and this pretender to the papacy, this antipope. He didn't use the words antipope, but he said pretender or something like that. And so on July 4th, they ruled in absentia that he had committed latae sententiae by his own act. He had excommunicated himself. Now, the question that begs is, what does that mean? And it's instructive that we should go back, for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to watch our episode with Kennedy Hall about the Society of St. Pius X. We spoke a lot about what it means if there even is a status of what we call irregular communion, because irregular communion means that it's just not, you're not in the church, but you're sort of in the church. What does that mean? And that's a label and an adjective that's often applied to what are thought by more liberal entities within the church as schismatic traditionalist groups like the Society of St. Pius X, that they're in irregular communion. But what does that mean? Any thoughts so far, Charlie? What does
No,
this
it all
does
sounds
this
good.
does
It's a
this
good
match what you have come to understand about the controversy surrounding Archbishop Vigano?
it's a good backstory and good context.
Mm,
And it's just I feel like we talk about this so much with Pope Francis,
mm.
but yeah, you know way more about this backstory than I do. I kind of want to get into the Mel Gibson part.
Okay, yes, let's speed that along. But first I want to talk about that issue that I just brought up, and that is what does it mean to be in communion so as to understand what excommunication constitutes. So this is from a Catholic Theological Dictionary. Now, I would argue that this definition is wanting in a lot of ways, but let's just go for it and accept that this is something that strikes to the heart or gets to the heart of the matter of communion. The definition reads, in Christian parlance, the most sacred expression for any one of different forms of togetherness, as communion between God and the human soul in the divine indwelling, that is communion, between Christ and the recipient of the Eucharist in Holy Communion, among all who belong to the mystical body in heaven, purgatory, and on earth, so that's the church triumphant, suffering, and militant, in the communion of saints, and among those who belong to the Catholic Church as a communion of the faithful. This is the definition of communion. In other words, to be in union with through shared faith. Communion. Okay. So it comes from the Latin, of course, communio, which means sharing unity, association, and participation. Now, why this is so important is because if you're going to go ahead and say that someone is excommunicated or to conclude and declare them to be excommunicated, it means they're outside of union because of some public intentional act that takes them outside of the body, the ecclesia dei, the ecclesia, the community of God in the church. And it is a remunerative. It's for, I'm sorry, not remunerative, they don't get paid. I mean, it's a remedial move. The intention of excommunication is always to correct the sinner, the supposed sinner, who has remove themselves from supposedly from communion as some authority within the church, whether it be a local bishop or even up high enough to raise to the level of the papacy, someone who needs a corrective act, that there be reconciliation, and then eventually reestablishment of communion. It's supposed to be a penitential, but also, again, remedial tool. Good. Now, why I brought Kennedy Hall up in our episode with him about St. Pius X is that what's weird about all this is that only in modern times, and I have looked and examined, there's no such thing that the fathers spoke about or the Council of Trent fathers spoke of about a kind of limbo medial state wherein you could be declared irregularly in communion. That it's either you're in communion or you're excommunicated. You're either in the church or out.
Right.
Yes. So when I think of the inconsistency here, and this is something that is pretty apparent, is that Vigano, who was the whistleblower in the McCarrick scandal, and in exposing all of this terrible corruption, not just within the American church, but the worldwide church, and that type of corruption, theological, organizational, hierarchical, institutional, was not remediated. It was not fixed, but has been allowed to continue and even ferment under Francis. And he's calling out the problems, the inherent problems with, at the very least, the application and the praxis of Vatican II documents. I think I shared with you in the past, the Vatican II document that I think is just absolutely, it's emptied, it's obviated. And we could talk about whether you could have, see, can you have a pastoral council in which there's theological errors, and then that theological errors, does that mean they're still authoritative even though they were conciliar? Well, I don't know, but Nostra Aetate is just a disaster. Nostra Aetate is just a
Why?
disaster of pluralism. Well, first of all, it totally vitiates any traditional argument about supersessionism, replacement theology, which was always a teaching of the church. That the Jewish people were once again the chosen people, but they have been clearly replaced by Christ's universal Catholic Church and the community of believers that adhere to her. I mean, it just it goes, and then it has this relativistic attitude toward other religions, and that it almost puts other faiths on equal footing with Christ's one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. This is it's just off. Okay, even if the one could parse and read through and try to pick out, they're just trying to be respectful to other faiths and know that there could be some small insignificant, I'll use the word, um, elements of truth within them. Okay, fine. No one's doubting that. So when, for example, Muslims declare that, I don't know, there is an Archangel Gabriel. Well, yeah, that's true, but it's just confirmation of the truth that's already embedded in the locus of which is in the Catholic faith. So, I mean, what are we talking about here? That's just a kind of residual osmosis type of rub off of faith, you know?
Yeah.
Um, it's almost accidental, if you will. So, uh, so we're talking about the text itself, which you can just try to squeeze like a turnip, some sort of uh, validity out of it by parsing it out. But why would you, if a council is authoritative and truly guided by the Holy Spirit, as we would contend, well, then why should we have to squeeze the turnip here? This is not holy written scripture where there might be contradictions, but then of course we have the Spirit guiding and enlightening the church as the body of Christ in the sensus fidelium to determine the correct and divinely inspired and guided interpretation of it. So This is problematic. Did I stop short of thought that I had there, or did I go off
I
on?
don't think so.
Okay, so
Well, you were talking about Vatican II, and I
yeah, yeah,
asked
yeah. So
why.
this is again. So even in my one of the tweets that I've had that has gone most viral is I wrote a kind of defense of Archbishop Vigano to him. I don't know if he's seen it, but it got like 11,000 or something likes or what have you. And it just I said that I will pray and fast for you, my dear brother in Christ, who so boldly attempts to rid the church of this pervasive evil that seems to be infecting it. I don't know if it's 11,000. Maybe I was being hyperbolic. It's around 10,000.
Likes?
Yes, you could check me on that.
I didn't know you were cooking like that these
Yeah,
days.
with the Vigano tweet, yes. So, um, what to do about this then? I again, I would just say pray for Archbishop Vigano and pray for all those who are so validly disaffected and feeling so ostracized from Holy Mother Church because the to use the Taylor Marshall book title has been infiltrated to such a degree by the men who have been granted power to rule over her, and yet they bring about just the ruination and contamination of the Sacra Doctrina that she's supposed to impart to souls and to minds and to hearts. Now let's talk about the Gibson letter, right? Do you want to bring that up?
Yeah,
Okay.
our guy Mel got into it.
Yeah, Mel got into it. So let's go ahead. Excuse me. Why don't you read the letter, Charlie, and then we can talk about it.
Dear Archbishop, I'm sure you expected nothing else from Jorge Bergoglio. I know that you know he has no authority whatsoever, so I'm not sure how this will affect you going forward. I hope you will continue to say Mass and receive the sacraments yourself. It really is a badge of honor to be shunned by this false post-conciliar church. You have my sympathies that you suffer publicly this grave injustice. To me and many others, you are a most courageous hero. As always, you have hit the nail on the head regarding the illegitimacy of Francis. You expressed the core problems with the institution that has eclipsed the true church, and I applaud your courage in expressing that. But more than that, in maintaining fidelity to the true church. You are a modern day Athanasius. I have all respect for the way you defend Christ and his church. I agree with you 100% that the post conciliar church of Vatican II is a counterfeit church. This is why I built a Catholic church that only worships traditionally. You are welcome to come and say Mass there anytime. Of course, being called a schismatic and being excommunicated by Jorge Bergoglio is like a badge of honor when you consider he is a total apostate and expels you from a false institution. Remember that true schism requires innovation, something you have not done, but something that Bergoglio does with every breath. He, therefore, is schismatic. However, he has already ipso facto excommunicated himself by his many public heresies. And then he cites Canon 188 in the 1917 Code. As you already know, he has no power to excommunicate you because he is not even a Catholic. So rejoice, I'm with you, and I hope Bergoglio excommunicates me from his false church also. Bergoglio and his cohorts have the clothes and the buildings, but you have the faith. God bless and keep you. If you need anything, just ask. I will try my best to help. With admiration and undying respect, Mel Gibson.
Hmm.
Huh?
Are you where Gibson's at now?
No.
Okay. Why?
Why am I not aware?
No, I said, what are you where he is? In
Oh,
his disposition, his
it
positions.
just makes me feel too. I want to say, I would say no, but I think I'm partly saying no because I'm uncomfortable by saying yes. Like
Mhm.
I'm almost
Mhm.
just fearful of saying yes. I don't want to say yes. And it's almost like a conspiracy theory that you don't want to be true, but it might be. So I'm going to have to look into it more. And that's just a way of stalling on this, on answering that question. But right now, I would say no.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a, what we can say without a lot of controversy or even back and forth and contention is that the point that he makes that I find so profound is that for truly faithful Catholics, whether you're someone who's going to, no matter what, I mean, like, let's go with Michael Knowles or someone, or no matter, or just someone who's kind of on the fence and doesn't want to, nor do they feel in the position, whether it's because of ignorance, kind of holy ignorance, or lack of knowledge, or even just a kind of unwillingness to dive in and get into the to mess that is what everyone on the spectrum, from Vigano to someone who's just a pope splainer, will say is that Francis has caused this. I mean, and those who are in his cohort, as Gibson says, he's caused this. Now, I don't know. I will also say, I don't know if Francis has excommunicated or Bergoglio has excommunicated himself. I don't know that. And nor do I have the authority to declare it. And nor would I ever claim to have the authority to declare it. But can I declare that he's a heretic? Yes. Because we know what the nature of a heretic is. Can I say that he's a schismatic? Yes. He's a schismatic. And one could say, well, if he's a heretic and a schismatic, then he's excommunicated himself. Oh, yes, but I don't know. I don't know what would be the purpose of declaring him as such. So yeah, getting this whole point of can you think of remember when I would teach in European history, the problem with all of the imperial versus papal conflicts that erupted during the Middle Ages and really from about what we call the 9th or 10th centuries all the way through to 17th, 18th century. What was so scandalous to the people of the time, whether it be the Avignon captivity or even when we're talking about the Great Schism in the between the West and the Eastern churches, is well, this frightens the faithful because all of this division was not divinely intended, one could clearly argue. Jesus declares in the Gospel of John that he prays to the Father openly that all of the people and all the sheep in his flock might be one. That there's one Catholic Church, there's one portal of salvation. And to see people elevated to positions of authority that are sowing obvious division and obvious, they're the sources of enmity and an evil anarchy, not that anarchy we like, but the evil ecclesial anarchy and schism. Well, it's disturbing to say the least. We shouldn't be at each other's proverbial throats. We shouldn't be that. And that's what this, particularly, we shouldn't be at each other's throats if indeed the people who are the victims of all this chaos and unrest are the most faithful and those who are holding on to the cross and to the church with the greatest fervor and devotion. And to see what's happening in the church is just ruinous to us. It truly wounds. And I find that when people read Vigano, they say, "Oh, he's so angry." There's anger. Well, this is a holy and righteous anger. The church that he loved and he served his whole life from his from the age of reason, even before that, in his probably tearful and joyful prayers as a boy, all the way through his priesthood and his episcopacy, it's being torn. It's being assailed, and it's being assailed and attacked from within.
Yeah, it gets really uncomfortable once you get to here.
Mm. And you mean the passage where it says, as you already know, he has no power to excommunicate you because he's not even a Catholic.
And I hope Bergoglio excommunicates me from his false church also.
It'd be a mark of pride. Yeah.
No, I don't know if
Oh,
I'm there yet, is what I'm saying.
oh, yes, I see. Yeah, I don't want to be formally excommunicated. That being said, if it indeed came because I was holding fast to the deposit of the faith and to holy written scriptural truth, then let it be.
Yeah.
Remember that we had that episode that you declared that Richard was right about Francis? Remember we were talking about how wild it was that
What was that topic?
it was when it was with Fiducia Supplicans,
Yeah.
and then we went off on that. I mean,
Yeah.
and then you asked me if I could just rehash this, whether I felt vindicated
I
because
remember this.
everything that I was suspicious of and rightfully alarmed by from the beginning of the Francis pontificate has come to rotten and insidious realization. But I don't feel I feel actually I could say I feel vindicated a bit. I don't relish being right in this regard. In fact, I'd much rather have been wrong and be celebrating the conversion of a man who's deeply, deeply psychologically and mentally and spiritually wounded. And he takes out that vindictive, Peronist, vicious, um, what would be disease, suffering on everyone around him, and unfortunately, because of his position on the Universal Church, and he'll have to answer for that
It's
very shortly.
disgusting. We should have been lapping during COVID.
Yes. Oh yeah. Well, we didn't even bring up the absolutely diabolical response of Francis and his ilk. With, of course, we had Blase Supich here in Chicago talking about how taking an abortion derived and tainted vaccine is an act of love.
During homilies. It's
Yeah,
disgusting.
and instructing, yeah, and having priests instruct
I want to throw up.
people that they have a moral obligation to do so.
I think back on that and I seriously want to take another shower. That's how
Mm,
disgusting I feel about the mishandling of those 2 years.
yep. And how do you evangelize people? It's talk about a miracle within the church that people are still coming in the church, having gone through that experience, and people are still being called to full communion with the church, just communion with the church. Um, Despite all of that, despite the repugnant cowardice. I mean, just total absence of any vertebrae, any principle, any integrity, just zero, negative. It would have been better if they just. I mean, think about if they just said nothing, if they just were silent, like the Holy Spirit just zippered their
It just
mouths,
didn't have
it would have
like it
been better.
was if it was like hearing a confession, you just forget about it. Or you
Yes,
just don't you're not able
correct.
to acknowledge it.
Nope. And I think I would just offer that the Holy Spirit will not allow the faithful to forget that. They closed the churches. As I said was it with Dellingpole or on another podcast, that there's no record during the Black Plague, during the bubonic plague, where Europe lost in various areas a third to half of its population. And people were writhing in the streets, dying with boils on their skin. Buba. That's why it's called the bubonic plague, the pustules, purple pustules that were people were exposing on their skin. And they didn't close the churches. In fact, the reason that so many monasteries became absolutely vacant was because the monks left the monasteries to care for the sick in the streets and then contracted the disease and brought it back to their communities. And instead, you had the opposite going on. Maybe, and you know, to his credit, Vigano was, I would almost go say we could track this, but if you go back to COVID, it's really the intensity and the precision of his attacks on the Francis Church just spiked and then just continued to get much more and more virulent during and after COVID. Rightfully so.
Do you want to talk Brandon Johnson?
This guy. Brandon Johnson, mayor of Chicago, otherwise known as BLM Brandon.
We got two videos. Let's play the first one.
So we cut off the pipeline of boys between the ages of 10 and 19 being either victims or the perpetrators. So, yeah, it is personal. Black death has been unfortunately accepted in this country for a very long time. We had a chance 60 years ago to get at the root causes, and people mocked President Johnson. And we ended up with Richard Nixon. I'm gonna work hard every day to transform this city. That's what it takes to build a better, stronger, safer Chicago. I need everybody to step up.
Okay.
And
Thoughts there. Charlie's beside himself for those who are waiting with bated breath. He's lost his ability to speak after
no,
that
I'm
first video.
fine.
Wait till you see the
I'm
second
fine.
video.
I'm fine. Sometimes it seriously feels like we're in a movie.
Right. It's a really bad movie though. It's not even terribly entertaining.
That's a good point. It used to be a better movie.
Right. At least the forces of evil were a little bit shrouded, and there could have been a backstory where
Or
they
more
were once
craft,
good.
more craft. Yes, there was some
Yes.
downfall of some sort, and they weren't just
Yes.
they weren't just puppets that were paid for. There was actually some villain arc that was
Right.
semi-inspiring to the sick part of yourself.
Yes. But in our own age, it's just from the very appearance of these bad actors, they're just disturbed sociopaths and utter liars, mendacious promoters from the beginning. Self-promoters largely, but of course they have their causes that they glom onto. And for Brandon Johnson, it's I love that statement. This is a country that had long not cared about Black death. What are you talking about? Right? And then I love, is there another phrase? Is there another phrase that is repeated over and over again when someone has no idea what they're talking about than root causes? I detest it. I would love to do a LexisNexis search on Google for when root causes got into the vernacular. I will almost guarantee you I will sell a large portion of my house. You can come and Airbnb it for free. If root causes did not spike in 2020, everything we have to search out root causes. I wonder how many times it's appeared in the Wednesday Journal, root causes. So all that being the case, the root causes, we have to investigate the root causes. We keep investigating it. And then that wonderful, as the great historian that Brandon Johnson obviously is, he's read so many books on the American 20th century in which he said, oh, we mocked, or the white supremacists and everyone who was not an eventual member of Black Lives Matter mocked LBJ and the Great. Well, he doesn't even know that, of course, he created the Great Society, and that the Great Society is proven over and over again. You could even look at a great book by Amity Shlaes, author of the America's Great Depression, or not America's Great Depression, but the Great Depression. And then she also wrote the book on, I think it's one of the definitive works on the Great Society programs, that this is done more to impoverish and disable Black Americans, particularly as they're trying to advance economically in the United States, than any other series of programs that could ever be fathomed or funded by government. And then, of course, he stumbles into something in which I shared with you when we were talking about prep for this episode. He's right in a degree, or to a degree. Richard Nixon was no great champion or friend of Black people, but Nixon's deleterious and harmful policies did not necessarily have a particular racial component to them. They didn't just disaffect Black people. They disaffected all Americans. I shouldn't say that, except those within the already established bureaucratic, financial, and, well, we could also call them established classes. So when, for example, and Brendan Johnson, that would just be, it's funny because if you told Brendan Johnson that the United States was taken off the gold standard, first, he wouldn't know what the hell that meant. And then secondly, he could never even come to a conclusion that if you even colored it as saying that this was harmful to Black people, which it clearly was. I mean, in a time in which in the previous decades, dating back to the 1930s and 40s, Black Americans were making enormous and substantial achievements in terms of economic prowess and the starting of Black companies and enterprises. And of course, yes, much of this was lost during the Great Depression and had to be reestablished. And even more so, you had, because, and I know this is controversial, but we make this case within the book, within segregation, of course, flowering and flourishing Black communities thrived in large part because they had an artificial need for self-sufficiency. And this is spoken of by Walter Williams. It's talked about by Thomas Sowell. Tom Woods does a great job in The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, speaking about these dynamics. And so what was so ruinous, of course, every major, especially federal program that came from the Great Society, from Lyndon Baines Johnson, yes, Richard Nixon, yes, Gerald Ford, yes, all of these administrations, including Jimmy Carter founding the Department of Education, in which the United States went from first ranked in the world in terms of educational prowess all the way down to 24th since then. I mean, and the expenditure has soared to unheard of heights, and actual achievement has plummeted. I mean, these are all programs, the war on drugs, the Great Society, all of these have been so wasteful. And but you could argue, and this is my point about where he stumbled into being right, though he wouldn't know it if it hit him in the ass, is that Brendan Johnson, when he scolds and upbraids and implicates Richard Nixon, yeah, it's because Nixon took us off the gold standard. It's because he supported price controls. It's because he did disastrous economic things that only encouraged the growth of the regulatory state. He formed the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. If you did just a basic economic analysis of the cost associated with the Environmental Protection Agency and tried to even compare it and take away its supposed gains in terms of protecting the environment, how ruinous, how awful has it been to creation of and entry points for Blacks, whites, Latinos, everybody in the United States, again, who's not in a corporate or financial position or industry. And David Stockton, the great economist from the Reagan administration, says, if you do an analysis, these type of what we call breadwinner jobs, wherein you can raise a household comfortably in a middle class standard, since like he said from I believe 1980, in his analysis, 0 have been created in the entire Midwest. And this is all government interference. It's government policy and quasi, Mises would call it actually real socialism. And it's been just devastating to the Black community. He wouldn't know any of those arguments. He's never heard of any of those, but he fell into some truth there.
Do you know how many people died in Chicago over the
19.
Do you know how many were shot?
108?
109.
109. I was close.
Yeah.
They found someone else since the last time I saw it.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, well, since we're talking about, well, let's hold off on those stats because I think that will speak a little bit more to
the second video. All right, let's run it.
Which we'll run now.
Now look, white supremacy is real, y'all.
Say that. Say that.
I'm gonna say that one more time.
Say that.
Because in case the city of Chicago don't know, you got a black mayor with a black wife, black children on the west side of Chicago. And all of these other administrations that shut down our schools, that shut down public housing, that raided the pensions, that sold off the parking meter, that sold off the skyway. Those people ran this city to the ground, and now they expect a brother to fix it in a year.
Say it.
Well, guess what? We're off to a great start, and I look forward to fixing they mess, building up our communities for the next 23 freaking years. God bless you, Chicago. Southside pride.
So,
Charlie, white supremacy is real.
I'm going to say it again.
White supremacy is real. Because this is the Biden thing. When he says something twice, that makes it real. When he says it a third time, it's really real. I mean, like, you cannot escape the reality and truth of what I just said 3 times. He's getting his cues and his rhetoric. Can you imagine Joe Biden? You know, the great saint Claude Valdeus was a student of a rhetoric student of St. Augustine. Black Lives Matter Brandon is a rhetoric student of Joe Biden. Joe Biden's your great philosophical and rhetorical sage.
Yeah.
Mentor. Now, does he have a point when he says previous administrations in Chicago have raided pensions? Yes. They've shut down schools. Yes. They've underfunded certain communities. Yeah. That's all true. Right? Was the Daley administration openly racist in that regard? Was the Rahm Emanuel administration openly racist in that regard? Oh, by the way, Lori Lightfoot, was she in white supremacist too? So he goes on to say, I love that when he says all these things, that they were all that led to the ruin of the city, and they have now given the responsibility or handed it off to a brother to get it fixed in 1 year. And Charlie, what could he be alluding when he says we're off to a great start? In what way? The fact that the city has spent now over $1 billion to attempt to resolve the migrant crisis that they created by insisting that Chicago and Illinois would be a sanctuary city? What about the violent crime rate? They're off to a great start there. Do you have that tweet or that DM I sent you about the murder rates in different locales? If you could bring that up, I want to speak to what he could be alluding to regarding the great start. And then he has that weird allusion to he's going to do it for another 23 years. Is there a kind of weird 6-term limit on being the mayor?
I was confused by that as well.
Yeah, I don't know where he got that number. Someone in the audience could message us and tell us that, because I don't know. That was kind of creepy from my mind. Are you finding that the murder figures from different locales?
Yeah.
Okay. Remember the old joke during even the Rahm Emanuel administration was that violence in the city of Chicago was so endemic and widespread that people would call it Chirac, right? Well, that would be a little bit of an insult to Iraq, as it turns out, and Afghanistan. So you got the figures yet? Oh, here we go. All right. So following a Dan Proft is a talk show host on AM 560, the conservative, albeit milquetoast, radio station here in Chicago. Dan Proft says it would be understandable to simply ridicule BLM Brandon for the silly kid that he is, or to get into particulars of the Great Society and the impact of the $35 trillion spend on transfer programs over the last 60 years. Of course, he says that, I think BLM Brandon would say, or Brandon Johnson would say, that $35 trillion over the past 6 decades is just not enough. And because it's not enough, it shows the inherent racism in both Washington and local politics. But regarding how much the city has advanced, right? The homicide rate, I looked these up for the following locales, and these are in varying years. So this is where the statistics, but they're all between 2013 and 2024. Venezuela, I'm sorry, 23. Venezuela's homicide rate. This is homicides per 100,000 people in Venezuela. In 2021 was 12.61. South Africa in 2023 was 45.53. That they have a problem with violent crime there and murder. Mexico, and I believe this is 2021, 26.11. Colombia, 25.27. Brazil, 20.61. This is the kicker. Charlie, did this shock you or no?
Yeah, this did. And South Africa shocked me as well. That
Right.
seems absurd.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Afghanistan in 2021. Mind you, this is during the year in which there's still a war going on for half of it, and the Taliban takes over Afghanistan. At that point, oddly enough, you could say the civil war ceased, but was there still violence in Afghanistan? Yes. Supposed anarchy because there's no real government established. And yet in Afghanistan in 2021, the murder rate was what, Charlie?
4.02, which I'm a little iffy about that.
You could be, okay, so maybe they're lying about the statistics, but okay, let's say they're lying a bit. It's still ridiculous.
Right.
Okay, compared to, as we're going to find out, Chicago. Okay, Iraq in 2013. Now, this is a time of actual war, civil war.
Right.
In Iraq in 2013, the murder rate, now you could say, I know the statistics, statisticians are going to bear this out. They're going to say, well, the war and combat deaths are not counted here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. But again, one might, at least I would suspect, that in a time of utter devastation, civil war, impoverishment, and the like, the homicide rate is going to tick up. Now, someone who's a statistician and does demographic studies like this could refute me, but at the same time, we're talking about Iraq. The murder rate was 9.41 in 2013. Chicago in 2024. That means up to today, with the most recent 19 added to the homicides over the holiday weekend, is 10.91. 10.91 homicides per 100,000 residents. And that's just up to today. So unless the population is going to increase exponentially or the murder rate plummet, the homicide rate is going to go up.
Right.
So what is this progress he's talking about? As you go throughout the city, Charlie, are people, is it teeming with economic activity, even what we might call a kind of civilizational or cultural optimism?
The latter, definitely no.
Definitely no. There's despair. There's impoverishment. There's utter consternation, division, worry. And this is when the economy is being propped up by Fed fiat currency intervention, and this shadow ghost economy is operative. What's going to happen when the inevitable recession, and it's going to be a deep one, comes?
When do we consider it a recession?
After it's 2 successive quarters of negative GDP.
Okay.
I'm sorry, is it 2 or 4? I think after 4 successive quarters, it's a depression.
So a year.
Mm-hmm. 2, yes, 2. Someone could correct me on this. I should know this since I'm studying all the time in finance, but 2 quarters is recession, 4 quarters is depression, or it might be 6 quarters. I can't remember. Negative GDP.
Okay.
Of course, but again, all these figures and terms are sent askew, are all skewed because of how the government has changed and reconfigured what GDP or how we calculate GDP. Government spending is calculated as part of it and the like. So how do we know?
Yeah.
He's your mayor. But what's wild too is that, can you think of, I know you're not, and nor should you be, thank God, you should be grateful that you're not in this camp of being aware of city politics or even city policy that the Brendan Johnson administration or the Lori Lightfoot before it or the Rahm Emanuel or the Jane Byrne administration pursued. But has any one of those policies that Brendan Johnson is pursuing, is it markedly or even in small ways different from the policies that were pursued by his predecessors? No. In fact, when he's calling for open reparations for Black residents, when he's pursuing all of the most radical and leftist progressive policies, including what is going to be, I would expect, a non-contentious and rather amicable negotiation with the people who brought him to power, and that's the Chicago Teachers Union, the CTU, on all of their ridiculous demands, their risible demands. He's just tripled, quadrupled, or quintupled down on all the things that, yes, the corrupt and bankrupt and corporatist Rahm Emanuel did, or the Dailies, who are part of the Democratic machine, or were the Democratic machine in Chicago. So what is that? He's not changing anything. He's just speeding its destruction. I mean, whereas Rahm Emanuel might consider what the Board of Trade how the Board of Trade would respond to a financial services tax or something like that, he just doesn't even consider it. Oh, what progress? You're still going the same way. "23 more years of it too, if he has his way."
Do you want to talk about a town that's not making a lot of progress also?
Very much, by the way, adjacent to Brandon Johnson's neighborhood where he lives in Austin.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
It's the people segment. Meanwhile in Oak Park. What new Illinois laws mean for Oak Park? The new laws include a minimum wage increase and a gas tax increase. As if our gas tax, or as if gas prices need raising.
This is so timely because I was just reading the major segment about interventionism and price and wage setting in human action. So I can only imagine what Mises would say about this. I don't have to imagine. I know what he said.
Illinois new laws went into effect July 1st, including a minimum wage increase and a gas tax increase. In Chicago, minimum wage workers will now make a base pay of $16.20 an hour. Before, the minimum wage was $15.80 per hour. In Cook County, which encompasses Oak Park, minimum wage will increase to $14.05 an hour from $14 per hour for non-tipped employees. Tipped workers' base pay will remain at $8.40 per hour.
And these figures were arrived at because of intense economic study.
Tipped workers in Chicago, however, will see an increase in their base wages. Now these workers will make $11.02 per hour plus tips, up from $9.48 per hour. Some say the increased wages will allow for better service and employee retention, according to ABC Chicago. But some critics say the cost may have to be covered by customers.
Well, who else are they going to be covered by? Some critics.
Illinois gas tax also increased July 1st by 2 cents to 47 cents per gallon. Oh my goodness. Oh,
yeah.
I thought it went from, okay.
According 47 cents per gallon. When you're talking about a gallon of gas being $4, you're talking about an over 10% tax.
No, it used to be, I think what they're saying is it used to be 45.
No, I'm not talking. No, I'm not. I know it's not the increase.
I get it.
Yeah.
It's hard digesting it live as I'm reading it because you're trying to do the math.
Wow, I can't believe they're going to quote the Illinois Policy Institute.
According to the Illinois Policy Institute, that means a typical driver will pay about $184 more in gas taxes than in 2019, when the tax was increased to 38 cents per gallon from 19 cents.
Now, mind you, why this is such a harmful and deleterious tax is because taxes of this nature, gas is what's called or in this case, gasoline, an inelastic good. So a bad economist like Steve Moore will say, well, this means that people will everything's going to raise all the costs of things that require transport are going to go up because they have to pay more. So trucking companies have to pay more for gas. That's not necessarily accurate. The true harmful effect is that because it's an inelastic good, yes, you're going to see some increase in prices because of what was aforementioned. But the worst thing about this is that it curtails expenditure in other areas. So because each Illinois family or each Illinois, or the typical driver, according to the Illinois Policy Institute, has to spend $184 more in gas, that means they're spending $184 less elsewhere because they're not going to stop buying gas. That's why it's called an inelastic good. Follow?
Yeah.
Good.
It's because the demand stays the same.
Yes, right. The demand, right, precisely. You're moving you're not really changing the demand curve at all. You're just changing the price curve.
The average gas price in Cook County as of July 2nd was $4.16. According to AAA, almost 9% more than the state average of $3.83 per gallon of regular gasoline. Gas taxes disproportionately affect middle and low income individuals. According to Illinois Policy Institute, and Illinois' retail gas price is the 7th most expensive in the United States. Illinois Policy Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization that, according to its website, advocates to protect civil liberties, limit the power of government, and bring down property taxes.
I cannot believe that.
How did they get in here?
Institution.
How did they get past
Rocky's beautiful heroic institution made it into the Wednesday Journal. God bless them.
Quote, Illinoisans were already overburdened with heavy gas taxes before this latest hike, and now it will be more costly for tens of millions of Illinoisans expected to take to the roads this summer, Bryce Hill, director of fiscal and economic research at the Institute, said in a news release, quote, these tax increases continue to damage our quality of life and make Illinois an expensive place to live.
True, all true.
The group claims that there will be a $1.1 billion increase in taxes overall in 2024. In Illinois fiscal year 2025 budget, officials say, quote, individual income taxes are forecasted to grow $979 million. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed a $53.1 billion state budget June 5th, the largest in state history, with an emphasis on child care and education, according to Courthouse News Service.
And as we've seen over the decades, those are wise investments.
Another tax-related increase is one on sports wagering. Starting July 1st, the tax was increased from 15% to up to 35%, according to the Illinois fiscal year 2025 budget. That could bring in about $200 million in additional revenue for the state. Illinois also projects about a $22 million increase in revenue for gaming taxes and about $7 million more for adult use cannabis tax.
Yeah. Remember all of the old bromides about how why the state tried to keep gambling illegal because it created such violence and it could impoverish people, and and then what happens? Just like all the supposed vices that were once seen truly as sins and the state just appropriates it and uses it as instruments for fundraising for its own malevolent purposes.
In Oak Park, Dutchess Cannabis Company recently replaced the MedMen Cannabis Dispensary at 1142 Lake Street. The village collects a local cannabis tax on top of the state tax. Another July 1st change is that immigrants lacking permanent legal status can now apply for standard Illinois driver's licenses.
Woohoo!
Instead
How do they obtain insurance? But go ahead.
Instead of receiving a temporary visitor driver's license, these immigrants can now get a limited 4-year driver's license that say, quote, federal limits apply, according to the Illinois Office of the Secretary of State. The application process is the same as a temporary visitor driver's license. The individual must have lived in Illinois for more than a year and show certain documents, including proof of residency and car insurance. The applicant must also pass vision, written, and driving tests. The licenses, however, cannot be used to obtain a real ID or to register to vote.
You don't need to register. You can just show up the day up.
According to the Illinois Office of the Secretary of State. In Oak Park, there was an influx of migrants in late October 2023. All the migrants under Oak Park's care found new homes by early April 2024. Some resettled in the village and others in neighboring communities. Yeah, to take it back to COVID, they know now that they can kind of do whatever they want.
Yeah. Sure. Who's stopping them?
So
The Illinois Policy Institute could put out its white papers, and do heroic work and try to advocate for the ordinary, in fact, the lower and middle class subject of Illinois, but they're just going to get away with it. They're going to get away with the larceny and the pillaging. Next story.
Oak Park aims to dismantle stigmas around minority mental health.
Wait, stigmas around minority mental health?
Observing National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, quote, breaks down barriers, officials said.
Oh my God. Root causes of breaking down barriers. Go ahead.
July marks National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, well, it escaped me, but thank you
because
for reminding me.
you don't know this. You don't know this, but color isn't just physical. Color is mental as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the color of your skin, it also has like a mind to it. So mental health disproportionately affects minorities.
God.
And aims to spotlight the distinct mental health challenges encountered by racial and ethnic minorities in the United States, while advocating for strategies to dismantle barriers and combat stigma. The Community Mental Health Board of Oak Park Township is one of the resources in the community that recognizes this month and provides resources and treatment. This board acts as a funder supporting mental health, substance use, and developmental disability services for Oak Park residents.
Wait, it supports substance use? I mean,
substance use services or disability services. I don't know. Additionally, the board performs needs assessments for the local community. Quote, What we do is identify the specific needs of Oak Park residents and help to fund programs that eliminate barriers to care, said Community Mental Health Board Executive Cheryl Potts. Potts said that national minority, oh my gosh, if they make me say it again after this is the last time. Potts said that National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month is significant because minorities have the same rates of diagnosis of mental health disorders as non-Hispanic whites, typically around 20 to 25% of all populations. Quote, the biggest
Well, then if that's the case, why do we need a minority mental health
they're
awareness?
getting it to it.
Oh, okay.
The biggest issue is access to treatment, engagement, and
Oh.
care. Approximately half of white individuals seek treatment, which is still very low, but this rate drops substantially for other minorities, 40% for Black individuals, 35% for Latinx individuals, and 25% for Asian communities, Potts said. Potts has more than 25 years of experience in the human services field
I bet she does.
as a resident of Oak Park and someone living with a mental health disorder. Potts has personally faced the challenges they aim to alleviate for their neighbors. With a family history of mental illness and addiction, Potts experienced a tragic loss when her brother died by suicide in 1999. Quote, to me, mental health is not just my work, it is my life's passion. I believe lives can be saved when people have the information and the ability to seek care because recovery is possible. Unfortunately, my brother did not get to achieve it, but I am able to live in recovery, Potts said. Potts emphasized that representation matters. She explained that the purpose of this awareness month is to begin dismantling the stigma surrounding mental health and to acknowledge that mental health support is necessary for all demographics. According to Potts, these disparities are deeply concerning for community workers as individuals who receive care and treatment experience significantly better life outcomes. Recovery is both achievable and rewarding, yet many people endure their struggles in silence rather than seeking help. Quote, minorities face distinct challenges compared to white individuals, such as lack of insurance, inability to afford care, and being uninsured or underinsured, with these issues being especially prevalent in Black and Brown communities. Stigma and cultural competency barriers also are significant issues because mental health providers tend to be white and female,
No kidding.
which can be a barrier for individuals from Black or Latino communities who have unique cultural experiences affecting their mental health. Quote, these individuals may not connect with a white woman sitting on the other side of the table. Representation
Who
matters.
does? I know I don't.
And the purpose of National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, no, I'm just kidding. That's the last time for real, is to start breaking down the stigma and recognize that mental health support extends beyond just one demographic, Potts said. To better understand and address the mental health needs of the Community Health Board performs a needs assessment every 3 years.
But this point of contention, though, is there a group more insane than your average white woman? Your college-educated white woman?
I know you're big on this topic.
That it's observable. It's self-evident.
Quote, the data reveals that minority populations are not participating in care at the same rates as white individuals. To address this, we fund several programs that focus on early intervention, particularly targeting youth and young adults, to highlight the importance of mental health and reduce the stigma associated with self-care.
How many times is she going to repeat this? We've heard this paragraph 5 times now.
Some of these programs the board collaborates with is Youth Educational Mentoring Basketball Association, and the board also fund programs on the treatment side, including the National Alliance on Mental Health for peer networks and engagement. The board collaborates with partners who provide valuable services twice a week, maintaining strong connections with them. Quote, one significant issue we're encountering is an increase in overdoses affecting both the west side of Chicago and nearby west suburbs, Potts said.
Good thing Brandon is making so much progress.
The West Side Opioid Task Force addresses opioid-related problems, but in Oak Park, we also focus on other substances, including those laced with fentanyl. Additionally, there is a shortage of Adderall and ADHD medication. Quote, my niece...
These are the solutions.
Quote, my niece overdosed 7 times, but has thankfully been sober for 4 years. Often people view the opioid epidemic and overdoses as distant issues, but these crises impact our families directly. We're grateful for organizations like Live for Lolly, which helped save her life when she was ready for recovery, Potts said. Potts outlined her long-term goals for improving mental health among minority communities in Oak Park Township. She emphasized the importance of increasing the number of people engaged in treatment and receiving care. Quote, the objective is to eliminate barriers to care, many of which stem from racist systems and structures.
Here we go.
Minority communities face higher rates of intergenerational trauma, which complicates access to mental health services, Potts said. For instance, new immigrants, such as Venezuelans, experience increased trauma, requiring a culturally responsive approach, recognizing that one solution does not fit all. Potts stressed the need to understand and address individual needs through treatment, medication, or other appropriate services, and to facilitate easier access to these resources. Potts added that the most crucial action people can take is to keep discussing mental health, removing its stigma, and making it a regular part of daily life.
Yeah, no thanks.
Quote, just as people talk about physical health, what they eat, and how much water they drink, we should normalize conversations about mental health. This can help ease the individuals into seeking care and alleviate their concerns, Potts
And
said.
take Adderall and ADHD medicines, which have proven so effective in attempting to rid young men of the crisis they feel.
Engaging in genuine and profound conversations about mental health is essential. Potts believes that sharing personal stories holds significant importance as others need to hear them. Potts said that increased dialogue about mental health helps to normalize the topic, making it easier for individuals to seek and receive care.
Yeah, this is just the DARE approach to mental health and the mental health crisis, right? Let's get people out there to talk about it, and especially inform kids of their vulnerability to mental health issues. And then, of course, what ends up happening is, as DARE's proven time and time again, that if you went through the DARE program, you're like 4 times more likely to abuse drugs in the future. This is just going to have the same effect.
That's a segment.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
All right. You go out there and support, as a good Chicago resident, you go out there and support your mayor. Back him.
23 more years.
23 more years.
I'm never leaving.
Yep. That'd be great. 20 years from now, you're going to be Brendan Johnson's going to finally announce that he's not running. And then Charlie be up on the stage with his sign going, oh, no, we want to come 4 more years, 4 more years.
Yeah.
Who let Whitey in? That'd be great if they were like, who let Whitey in?
Jesse White, Danny Davis, they've been around for 30 years because of white supremacy.
Yes, yes, of course. Right. Because what's clear is that, there's, how could, the funny thing is they so badly wanted the Jussie Smollett thing to be so true. And now, thank God for that whole debacle, because everyone can, if you have just a modicum of memory of what happened before COVID, you could just laugh at all this insistence of white supremacy. I mean, obviously, if you're applying for any of the elite Chicago schools, because of all this white supremacy going around, and
you're way more likely to get in.
You definitely want to put down Caucasian on your application.
Yeah.
Or you want to be employed in the city of Chicago, the same institution that the previous mayor wouldn't even answer questions from white male heterosexuals. Well, then you definitely, because white supremacy is so rampant.
It's funny, when my white male friends were applying to colleges, when we were all applying to colleges together, one thing we really noticed is that's what they love seeing the most on the college application is Caucasian male.
Yes.
Straight.
Yes. Correct. That's what you want. And think of all the scholarship opportunities you have.
That's like the jackpot to these schools.
I mean, it's a gateway. It's a gateway drug. That's how you can achieve real mental health.
All
You
right.
good?
Yeah, let's shout out our sponsor.
Oh, of course. Let's go Alcords. Let's get that Tridentine brew out there, babe. All right?
We're at the
Summer's-
second half. We're at the second half of the year.
Yeah, we're in second half.
I'm
and
praying hard.
I know. Vigano, Tridentine brew. Man, gotta make it happen.
I think the Lord wants me to try out all the other beers just one last time for the rest of my life until TB just takes it over.
Takes over. I'm ready. I'm ready for the takeover. It's a friendly takeover, not hostile. So, all right. Any news on our front?
No.
No, not really. Okay. Let's keep
All right,
plugging.
everyone.
Check out everything on the blog and the website. Buy some stuff from us too. Buy some stuff from us. We got merch, the book. You can support me at buy me a coffee, Gary Richide, but it really is buying me a beer. Buy me a coffee is just a website. So go out and do that.
All right, everyone.
Peace.
God bless.